A teacher decides to humiliate a black girl in front of the whole class. He has no idea who her mother will turn out to be. Her unexpected actions will shock everyone and make him pay dearly for his bias. Where are you watching from? Share in the comments and don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss new stories. The towering iron gates of Westview Preparatory School gleamed under the morning sun, their elegance a testament to the prestige of the institution. Westview Prep wasn't just a school, it was an elite haven known for its sprawling campus, manicured gardens, and state-of-the-art facilities. Brick buildings stood tall with ivy crawling up their red walls and large windows that overlooked sports fields, laboratories, and lecture halls. The children who attended Westview came from privileged backgrounds, their lives draped in opportunities that other children could only dream of. This school promised them the best, and it demanded the best in return, or at least, that's what it liked to claim. Olivia was new here, a quiet, thoughtful girl of 13. She had grown up with the steady support of her mother, Amelia, a successful black entrepreneur whose charity work and determination had brought her to where she was now. Amelia was a woman of both confidence and grace, a figure who commanded respect and radiated strength. She had fought for every ounce of her success, breaking through ceilings and pushing aside barriers. Lily idolized her mother and was grateful for the chance to attend a school like Westview. She knew her mother had worked hard to provide her with this opportunity, and she didn't want to let her down. But on her first day, Lily had already begun to sense the school's unspoken divisions. Walking down the gleaming hallways, she noticed the whispers and sideways glances from other students. Her classmates wore designer clothes and carried themselves with an air of entitlement that made her feel out of place. Lily's uniform, though identical, somehow felt different on her. She held her books close, her gait lowered, as she made her way to her first class. In that class, she met Mr. Dominic. Mr. Dominic was the kind of teacher who prided himself on discipline and rigor, or at least, that's what he called it. Tall and graying, he wore tailored suits and spoke in a clipped, polished tone. His reputation as one of the strictest teachers at Westview was well known among students. He was the one you didn't want to cross, and his word was law in the classroom. His sharp eyes scanned his students as though sizing them up, looking for the slightest imperfection. On that first day, he had barely acknowledged Lily when she introduced herself. Instead, he simply nodded, his expression indifferent, as he asked the next student to speak. Lily felt the coldness in his demeanor, but she brushed it off. Perhaps he treated all new students this way, she told herself. Yet as the days went on, she began to notice things small, subtle things that added up. During a lesson on literature, Lily raised her hand, her heart racing with the hope of contributing to the discussion. Mr. Dominic looked past her, as if she were invisible. Minutes later, another student, Ava, a confident blonde girl from an influential family, raised her hand and was immediately acknowledged. It happened again and again, until it became a pattern Lily could no longer ignore. She was always the last to be called upon, and her answers, no matter how thoughtful, were met with barely concealed impatience. Lily's heart sank a little more each day. At lunchtime, she sat alone, clutching her sandwich while her classmates gathered in groups, laughing and chatting. She tried once or twice to join a conversation, but her attempts were met with polite, dismissive smiles. The sense of isolation grew heavier, and she found herself retreating into her thoughts, questioning whether she belonged here at all. Meanwhile, Amelia had no idea what was happening. She believed her daughter was thriving at Westview, and Lily kept her struggles hidden. She didn't want to burden her mother or disappoint her by revealing how out of place she felt. Amelia had often told her, "You belong anywhere you choose to be, Lily. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." Lily clung to those words, trying to muster the strength to ignore the subtle rejections and unspoken judgments she faced each day. As the week went by, Mr. Dominic's behavior escalated. He no longer ignored her contributions. Instead, he started to dismiss them. During a science lesson, Lily offered a solution to a problem on the board. Mr. Dominic's gaze shifted toward her, a thin, condescending smile on his lips. "That's an interesting perspective, Lily," he said, drawing out her name as if it were something foreign to him. but perhaps you should leave the more complex concepts to the students who are more prepared." A flush of embarrassment spread across Lily's cheeks as quiet laughter erupted around the room. She felt small, insignificant, and helpless in the face of his subtle ridicule. She lowered her gaze, biting her lip to stop the tears that threatened to spill over. But inside, she felt a mixture of shame and anger. How could he treat her like this? She had studied hard, put in the work, and yet nothing seemed to matter. The next day, Mr. Dominic decided to conduct a chemistry experiment. He had students work in pairs, carefully measuring liquids and mixing them according to instructions. When it was Lily's turn, he handed her a beaker filled with liquid and told her to pour it into a flask. Nervously, Lily followed his instructions, but as she began to pour, Mr. Dominic smirked. "Be careful, Lily. This isn't something you want to mess up," he said loudly, his voice laced with mockery. Lily's hands trembled slightly under his gaze. She tilted the beaker, and as she did, a small amount of the liquid spilled over, splashing onto the table. Her classmates stifled laughter while Mr. Dominic's face twisted in a sneer. "See? This is what I was talking about," he said, addressing the class as if Lily weren't even there. "Some students just aren't cut out for this." The laughter that followed was soft, but unmistakable, a chorus of judgment that pierced Lily's heart. She wanted to shrink into the floor, to disappear from the room and never return. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a humiliation, one orchestrated by her own teacher in front of her peers. The shame was suffocating. When she got home that evening, Lily was silent. She sat across from her mother at the dinner table, pushing her food around on her plate. Amelia noticed the dark circles under her daughter's eyes, the way her shoulders slumped, and the lack of spark in her usually lively gaze. Concerned, she asked, "Is everything okay, sweetheart?" Lily hesitated, her mind racing. She didn't want to worry her mother or seem ungrateful for the chance to attend Westview. But as she looked into her mother's warm, caring eyes, the weight of her experience became too heavy to bear. "Mom," she began, her voice barely a whisper, I don't think I belong at Westview." Amelia's face softened with concern. She put down her fork and reached across the table, taking Lily's hand. "What do you mean, honey? Why would you say that?" Lily's voice cracked as she recounted the small slights, the cold shoulders from classmates, and finally the humiliation orchestrated by Mr. Dominic. She tried to keep her voice steady, but tears streamed down her cheeks as she relived the painful moments in her mind. Amelia listened in silence, her grip on Lily's hand tightening as anger bubbled beneath her calm exterior. Her daughter's pain cut through her like a knife, and she felt a fierce protectiveness rising within her. She had spent her life fighting for respect and equality, and now her own daughter was facing the same battles in a place where she should have been safe and supported. "That man," Amelia said, her voice low and steady, "will regret the day he made you feel this way." Lily looked up, surprise flickering in her eyes. "Mom, you don't have to—" "No, Lily," Amelia interrupted, her tone resolute. "You deserve to be treated with respect, and I'm going to make sure you get it." As she spoke, memories of her own struggles surfaced in Amelia's mind, years of being underestimated, ridiculed, and dismissed because of her race. She had vowed never to let anyone make her feel small, and now she would do the same for her daughter. Mr. Dominic had underestimated them both, and he was about to learn a lesson in humility and accountability. That night, Amelia began to make her plans. She knew that Westview depended heavily on her financial support, contributions, and she intended to use that leverage. Her resolve was unshakable, and her determination grew with each passing moment. The next morning, Lily's heart sank as she made her way to Mr. Dominic's classroom. The fluorescent light seemed harsher, the walls colder, and each step felt heavier than the last. She had tried to tell herself that it would be fine, that maybe Mr. Dominic's behavior would improve, but doubt lingered like a dark cloud. She wanted nothing more than to turn around and run, to escape this place that seemed determined to push her away. The bell rang and the students settled into their seats, the usual chatter and laughter filling the room. Mr. Dominic entered briskly, his sharp eyes scanning the class with the same steely detachment. His gaze landed on Lily for just a fraction of a second before he moved on, as though she were merely a blemish on the otherwise perfect tapestry of his classroom. "Today," he announced, his voice echoing with authority, "we'll be conducting a demonstration of a chemical reaction. This is not a simple exercise, so I expect everyone to pay close attention and follow instructions precisely." Mr. Dominic's eyes glinted as he set up the materials on his desk, a series of beakers filled with liquids of varying colors, flasks, measuring spoons, and a Bunsen burner. The class leaned in with interest, but Lily felt a prickling sense of dread as she watched him organize the equipment. "Mr." Dominic turned to the class, his gaze sweeping over them until it rested on her. "Miss James," he said, his tone cold and calculated, "I believe you'll be assisting me today." Lily's heart pounded in her chest. She hadn't been called on to assist in any demonstration before, and Mr. Dominic rarely picked students to help him directly. She knew something was off, but there was no choice but to rise from her seat and join him at the front of the class. Her hands trembled as she stood by his desk, and she could feel the weight of her classmates' stares pressing down on her. Mr. Dominic handed her a beaker filled with a clear liquid. "Now, carefully pour this into the flask here," he instructed, pointing to a narrow-necked flask on the table. Lily took the beaker in her hands, steadying herself with a deep breath. She moved to pour it into the flask, her hand shaking slightly under Mr. Dominic's watchful gaze. Her palms were sweaty, and her fingers felt numb with anxiety. Just as she began to pour, he spoke. "Careful, Lily," he said, his voice dripping with condescension. "We wouldn't want you to make a mess, would we?" The words stung, sharp as barbs, and a flush of embarrassment rose to her cheeks. She hesitated for a split second, and in that moment, a small splash of liquid dripped from the beaker onto the table. Mr. Dominic's lips curled in a smirk, and a soft ripple of laughter ran through the classroom. "See? This is precisely what I mean," he said loudly, his tone mockingly disappointed. "Some students simply don't have the dexterity for this sort of work." Lily's cheeks burned, but she tried to ignore the laughter around her, focusing instead on finishing the task. She poured the remaining liquid into the flask, biting her lip to keep her composure. Her hands shook, her pulse pounding in her ears. She wanted to look anywhere but at Mr. Dominic, whose smug expression told her he had planned this all along. He wasn't finished. "All right, class," Mr. Dominic continued, directing his attention to the rest of the students. "This is why precision is key in science. You can't just stumble through things hoping they'll work out." Another round of quiet laughter spread across the room. Lily felt as if she were shrinking, her dignity crumbling under the weight of her classmates' judgmental stares. She wanted to scream, to disappear, to run away from the humiliation and hurt that throbbed inside her chest. "Miss James?" Mr. Dominic's voice broke through her thoughts, and she looked up, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of fear and anger. "Please clean up the spill and try to be more careful next time." Her hands fumbled as she picked up a cloth to wipe the table, feeling as though every move she made was a mistake. The room seemed to close in on her, the air thick with unspoken ridicule. She could feel the weight of her classmates' judgment, the subtle smirks and whispers that echoed in her mind. When the bell finally rang, signaling the end of the class, Lily gathered her books in a daze, her vision blurred with unshed tears. She made her way to her locker, feeling the hollow ache of humiliation settle deep within her. Her mind raced, replaying Mr. Dominic's words, his sneer, the laughter of her classmates, all of it swirling into a storm of shame and self-doubt. By the time she got home, she was exhausted, emotionally drained. She sat across from her mother at the dinner table, her appetite gone. She poked at her food in silence, her mind heavy with the memory of the day's events. Amelia watched her closely, noticing the shadows under her daughter's eyes, the way her shoulders slumped, the absence of her usual bright smile. "Lily," Amelia said gently, reaching across the table to take her daughter's hand. "What happened today?" For a moment, Lily wanted to keep it all to herself, to bury the pain and pretend it didn't matter. But the warmth in her mother's touch, the understanding in her gaze, unraveled her defenses. The words spilled out, raw and painful, as she recounted every detail of the day's humiliation. She told Amelia about the experiment, about Mr. Dominic's mocking tone, the laughter of her classmates, and the shame that had wrapped around her like a suffocating blanket. Amelia's expression hardened, her grip on Lily's hand tightening. She listened intently, her anger simmering beneath the surface. This wasn't just a bad day at school. This was a calculated act of cruelty, a deliberate attempt to make her daughter feel inferior. When Lily finished, a single tear slid down her cheek, and she looked up at her mother, searching for reassurance. Amelia wiped the tear away, her voice steady but fierce. "Lily, what Mr. Dominic did today was wrong. He had no right to treat you that way." "But maybe I'm just not good enough," Lily whispered, her voice trembling. "No," Amelia said firmly, her eyes blazing with determination. "You are more than good enough, and you deserve to be treated with respect." Lily looked away, her shoulders hunching as she tried to hold back more tears. "It's just, they all looked at me like I didn't belong, like I was less than them." Amelia's heart ached at her daughter's words. She had spent her entire life fighting against that same sense of inferiority, proving herself in a world that often saw her as lesser. She knew the pain of feeling unwelcome, the sting of prejudice, and she couldn't bear the thought of her daughter facing those same battles. "This isn't about you, Lily," Amelia said, her voice soft but resolute. "It's about them, Mr. Dominic, your classmates. They're the ones with the problem, not you. And I'm going to make sure they understand that." Lily looked at her mother, a spark of hope flickering in her eyes. "What are you going to do?" Amelia squeezed her hand, her lips pressed into a determined line. "I'm going to the school, and I'm going to show them exactly who you are and why you deserve to be there." That night, Amelia sat alone in her study, her mind racing with plans and possibilities. She had built her career on resilience, on standing up for herself and her community. She knew the power she wielded as a financial sponsor of the school, and she was ready to use it. The next morning, she began making calls. She reached out to her contacts in the school's administration, setting up a meeting with the head of the school board. She spoke to her legal advisor, ensuring she had every necessary document in place to make her demands clear. She wanted Mr. Dominic held accountable, and she wanted the school to understand that this kind of behavior would not be tolerated. As the week went on, Amelia found herself thinking back to her own experiences of prejudice. She remembered the job interviews where she'd been overlooked, the business meetings where her ideas had been dismissed. She had fought for her place in the world, and she had earned it. Now, she was ready to fight for her daughter's place too. But she knew that this fight wouldn't be easy. Mr. Dominic was well respected at Westview, and his connections ran deep. Amelia would need to gather her allies carefully, to build a coalition that would support her cause. She spent hours speaking with other parents, some of whom had also noticed Mr. Dominic's bias, but had been too afraid to speak out. Together, they began to form a plan, a united front against the prejudice that had infected their children's education. On the day of the parent meeting, Amelia dressed with purpose, choosing a sharp suit that radiated confidence and authority. She arrived at the school with her head held high, her resolve unbreakable. She was here not only as a mother, but as a force of change, determined to make Westview a place where every child was valued. As she entered the meeting room, the air was thick with anticipation. The parents, teachers, and school board members looked up, their eyes widening as Amelia took her seat at the head of the table. She met their gazes with steely determination, ready to fight for justice and respect. This wasn't just about Lily anymore. It was about every child who had ever felt unworthy, every parent who had ever feared for their child's safety and dignity. And Amelia was prepared to show them all that she was more than just a mother. She was a warrior for her daughter's future. The next morning, Amelia sat at her kitchen table, her mind churning with the weight of the previous day's revelations. She stared at her cup of coffee, untouched and cooling, as thoughts of her daughter's anguish flooded her mind. She couldn't shake the image of Lily's tear-streaked face, the pain in her voice as she described Mr. Dominic's humiliating treatment. Amelia knew she couldn't leave this unchallenged. She had fought too hard to build her life and reputation, and she would not let anyone make her daughter feel small. As the sunlight filtered through the kitchen window, Amelia pulled out her phone and began making calls. Her first call was to one of her closest friends and legal advisors, Annabelle, a fierce civil rights attorney who had always been a reliable ally. Amelia trusted Simone with her life. They had fought together in numerous battles for equality and justice, and Simone had never once let her down. "Simone, I need your help," Amelia said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. On the other end of the line, Simone's tone shifted immediately. "Anything, Addie? What happened?" Amelia explained the situation, describing every painful detail Lily had shared. She could feel her anger simmering beneath the surface as she recounted the way Mr. Dominic had belittled and humiliated her daughter in front of the entire class. By the time she finished, her hands were shaking, her grip tight around her coffee cup. Simone was silent for a moment, then spoke with quiet determination. "That teacher picked the wrong family to mess with. Let's start by gathering everything we need. I'll make some calls and get back to you by the end of the day. We'll go over all the options and make sure you have a solid case." Relieved, Amelia thanked Simone and hung up. She felt a surge of renewed purpose. This wasn't just a fight for Lily. It was a fight for every child who had been told they didn't belong, for every parent who had been afraid to stand up for their child. Amelia was determined to make Westview a place where no student would ever have to face the kind of prejudice her daughter had endured. Her next step was reaching out to other parents. Amelia knew she couldn't fight this battle alone. She needed allies. She made a list of parents whose children were also in Mr. Dominic's class, as well as those who had complained about his behavior in the past. She knew there were others who shared her frustrations, even if they hadn't been vocal about them. With each call, Amelia explained her situation carefully, gauging each parent's reaction. Some were sympathetic but hesitant, unwilling to jeopardize their children's education or their own standing within the school community. But others, particularly the parents of minority students, were more than willing to join her cause. They shared their own stories of prejudice incidents that had been dismissed or brushed under the rug by the administration. Amelia listened to their experiences, her resolve strengthening with each story. By the end of the day, Amelia had assembled a small but committed group of parents who were ready to support her. They agreed to meet that evening at her house to discuss their next steps and devise a plan of action. Amelia knew this wasn't going to be easy, but she felt a renewed sense of determination. For too long, people like Mr. Dominic had been allowed to wield their authority unchecked, and it was time for that to change. That evening, as the parents gathered in her living room, Amelia took a moment to appreciate the diversity of the group. They were a mix of backgrounds, races, and professions, united by a shared purpose. The atmosphere was tense but hopeful, and as they settled into their seats, Amelia could feel a sense of solidarity forming among them. Simone arrived shortly after, carrying a stack of documents and a notepad. She greeted everyone warmly, then took her place at the front of the room next to Amelia. The parents fell silent, their eyes fixed on her as she began to speak. "Thank you all for coming," Amelia began, her voice steady and strong. "I know this isn't an easy thing to do, but it's necessary. Our children deserve to feel safe and respected in their school, and it's up to us to make sure that happens." One of the parents, a man named Zachary, whose son had also experienced mistreatment, spoke up. "Amelia, I appreciate what you're doing. My son has come home more than once feeling defeated because of things Mr. Dominic said to him. But what exactly are we going to do? The school board is powerful, and I don't want to put my son's future at risk." Simone stepped in, her tone reassuring. "Zachary, I understand your concerns. The last thing we want is to jeopardize any of our children's education. But we do have options. We'll start by gathering written statements from each of you detailing your experiences and any incidents of discrimination you or your children have faced. I'll compile these into a report that we can present to the school board. They won't be able to ignore us if we stand together." Another parent, Sadie, nodded in agreement. "My daughter has felt out of place at Westview since day one. I thought it was just the adjustment, but now I realize it's more than that. Thank you for bringing us together, Amelia." As the meeting continued, Amelia outlined her vision for the campaign. They would approach the school board with their grievances, demanding not only the removal of Mr. Dominic but also a thorough investigation into the school's policies and practices. They discussed various strategies, from media outreach to legal action, and Simone took notes, preparing a detailed action plan. When the meeting concluded, Amelia felt a renewed sense of hope. These parents had entrusted her with their stories, their fears, and their frustrations. She was determined not to let them down. She walked them to the door, thanking each of them for their courage and commitment. She knew this was only the beginning, but she was ready for whatever challenges lay ahead. The following week, Amelia received a call from the head of the school board, inviting her to a private meeting. She accepted, her heart racing with anticipation. This was the moment she had been waiting for, a chance to confront the administration directly and make her case for change. On the day of the meeting, Amelia dressed with purpose, choosing a tailored suit that radiated confidence and authority. She wanted to make a strong impression, to show the board members that she was not just a concerned parent, but a force to be reckoned with. As she arrived at the school, she took a deep breath, steeling herself for the conversation that lay ahead. The meeting took place in a conference room filled with polished wood furniture and leather chairs. The members of the school board sat around the table, their expressions a mix of curiosity and guardedness. Amelia recognized several of them from school functions, but today she saw them in a new light. They were the gatekeepers of the school's reputation, the ones who held the power to make real change or to maintain the status quo. Amelia took her seat, her posture steady as she addressed the room. She began by explaining the incidents that had led her to this point, detailing Mr. Dominic's behavior and the impact it had had on her daughter and other students. She presented the written statements from the other parents, each one a testament to the pain and frustration their children had endured. The board members listened in silence, their faces impassive as they took in her words. But Amelia could sense a shift in the room, a growing awareness of the gravity of the situation. When she finished speaking, she handed them the report. Simone had prepared a meticulously organized document outlining their grievances and demands. One of the board members, a woman named Autumn, cleared her throat and spoke. "Miss James, we appreciate your concerns, and we take these allegations seriously. However, Mr. Dominic has been a respected member of our faculty for over 20 years. We would need substantial evidence to take any disciplinary action against him." Amelia met Autumn's gaze, her voice unwavering. "With all due respect, Autumn, we have more than enough evidence. These statements are just the beginning. I've also spoken with a legal team, and we are prepared to take this matter to the press if necessary. Westview has built its reputation on excellence and integrity, but allowing this kind of behavior to go unchecked is a betrayal of those values." The board members exchanged uneasy glances, the weight of her words sinking in. Amelia could see the cracks beginning to form, the realization that this was not a battle they could easily brush aside. After a tense pause, the chairman spoke. "Miss James, we understand your position, and we assure you that we will conduct a thorough investigation. In the meantime, we ask for your patience and cooperation as we address these concerns internally." Amelia nodded, knowing that this was only a partial victory. The investigation was a step in the right direction, but she knew she would have to keep the pressure on if she wanted real change. As she left the conference room, she felt a surge of determination. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Outside, she called Simone, filling her in on the details of the meeting. Simone listened carefully, then offered a piece of advice. "Amelia, they're going to try to delay this, hoping it'll die down. Don't let up. Keep the parents informed, and be prepared to go public if they don't take action soon." Amelia agreed, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. She was ready to fight not just for Lily, but for every child who had ever felt unwelcome, every parent who had ever feared for their child's safety and dignity. She knew the road ahead would be difficult, but she was more determined than ever to see it through. Amelia knew she had to be calm, measured, and unyielding. As she dressed that morning, she chose her outfit with purpose, a sharp, tailored suit in deep navy, a color that symbolized authority and confidence. She looked at herself in the mirror, her gaze steely and focused. This wasn't just a meeting, it was a battleground, and she was ready to fight. Lily sat on the edge of her bed, watching her mother with a mixture of admiration and anxiety. She had never seen her mother like this, so determined, so powerful. Amelia turned to her, giving her a reassuring smile. "Today, Lily, we're going to make sure they hear us," Amelia said gently, resting a hand on her daughter's shoulder. "This isn't just for you, it's for every child who's ever felt like they didn't belong." Lily nodded, drawing strength from her mother's words. She was still nervous, but knowing that her mother was standing up for her gave her a sense of courage she hadn't felt before. She hugged her mother tightly, whispering, "Thank you, Mom, for everything." Amelia hugged her back, her resolve solidified by her daughter's gratitude. "Always, sweetheart. Always." With that, she took a deep breath, gathered her documents, and made her way to Westview Prep. The school was bustling with activity as parents, teachers, and students filled the hallways. The smell of freshly polished floors mingled with the low hum of conversation. Amelia walked through the school with her head held high, ignoring the curious glances and whispers that followed her. She could feel the tension in the air as she approached the main hall where the meeting was to be held. Word had spread quickly about the brewing confrontation between Amelia and the school administration. As she entered the meeting room, the atmosphere shifted. Parents and board members looked up, their conversations falling silent, as Amelia took her seat at the front of the room. Simone was already there, waiting with a calm, professional demeanor that reassured Amelia. Around the table sat members of the school board, including Autumn, who offered Amelia a polite but distant nod. Mr. Dominic was also present, his expression a mixture of arrogance and defiance. Amelia clenched her jaw, pushing down the anger that simmered within her. This was not the time to lose her composure. She glanced at Simone, who gave her a slight nod, a silent reminder to stay focused. The chairman of the board, Mr. Jaspers, cleared his throat and began the meeting. "Thank you all for coming. As some of you may know, we're here to discuss recent concerns raised by Miss James and several other parents. Miss James, the floor is yours." Amelia stood, her heart pounding with a mix of anticipation and determination. She took a steadying breath and addressed the room, her voice clear and unwavering. "Thank you, Mr. Jaspers. I'm here today as a mother but also as an advocate for every student in this school. My daughter Lily, and many others, have experienced treatment in this institution that is, quite frankly, unacceptable. We're here to address the behavior of Mr. Dominic and the culture of prejudice that has taken root within Westview." A murmur rippled through the room, but Amelia pressed on undeterred. "For weeks, my daughter endured ridicule, humiliation, and unfair treatment from a teacher who was supposed to encourage and support her. Mr. Dominic singled her out not because of her performance or behavior, but because of his own biases. And unfortunately, Lily's story is not unique." She began reading aloud from the parent statements, each one a powerful account of discrimination and exclusion. As she spoke, she could see the expressions of shock and discomfort on the faces of some board members. Others shifted uneasily in their seats, clearly realizing the gravity of the situation. Mr. Dominic's face, however, remained impassive, a faint smirk tugging at the corners of his mouth. Amelia finished reading the statements and set them down, her gaze piercing as she looked around the room. This is not just about one teacher or one incident. This is about a culture that has allowed prejudice to flourish. As parents, we entrust our children to this school, believing they will be safe, valued, and respected. But how can we trust an institution that allows this kind of behavior to go unchecked? Autumn cleared her throat, her tone measured but defensive. "Miss James, we understand your concerns, and we assure you that the school takes these allegations seriously. However, Mr. Dominic has been a respected member of our faculty for over 2 decades. We cannot simply dismiss him based on a few complaints." Amelia's jaw tightened, but she kept her voice steady. "With all due respect, Autumn, these are not just a few complaints. These are the experiences of real children who have been hurt, belittled, and made to feel like they don't belong. And if the school is unwilling to take action, then we, as parents, will." Mr. Jaspers raised a hand, attempting to regain control of the meeting. Let's all remain calm. Miss James, what exactly are you asking the board to do? Amelia met his gaze, her voice firm and unyielding. I'm asking for Mr. Dominic to be removed from his position, and I'm asking for the school to implement a comprehensive policy to prevent discrimination and ensure that all students are treated with respect. Another board member, Mr. Michael, spoke up. Miss James, while we appreciate your passion, removing a long-standing teacher is not a decision we can make lightly. We would need substantial evidence beyond these statements. Simone, who had been quietly observing, stepped in. Mr. Michael, we have more than enough evidence to take this case to the media if necessary. Westview's reputation would undoubtedly be affected by the negative publicity, and it would be within the rights of the parents to file a formal complaint with the Education Board. The room fell silent. The board members exchanged uneasy glances, clearly realizing the potential repercussions. Amelia could see the hesitation in their eyes, the recognition that they were facing more than just an angry parent. This was a fight they couldn't afford to ignore. Finally, Mr. Jaspers spoke, his tone cautious. Miss James, we will take your concerns under advisement and begin a formal investigation. In the meantime, we ask for your patience as we work to resolve this matter internally. Amelia nodded, though she knew this was only a partial victory. She had forced the board to acknowledge the issue, but she also knew that an investigation could easily be dragged out, its findings buried if they weren't careful. As the meeting concluded, she exchanged a brief, determined look with Simone. They both knew that this fight was far from over. Outside the meeting room, Amelia gathered the other parents who had come to support her. She explained the board's response, noting their reluctance, but also the progress they had made in bringing attention to the issue. We're not done yet, she said firmly. They're going to try to make this go away quietly, but we're not going to let that happen. If they don't take action soon, we'll go public. The parents nodded in agreement, their resolve strengthening. They were ready to stand by her, to fight for their children's right to a safe and inclusive education. Together, they left the school, each of them filled with a sense of purpose and solidarity. A week later, Amelia received a call from the school. The board had completed their investigation and would be holding a press conference to announce their decision. Amelia felt a surge of hope mixed with apprehension. She knew this could be a turning point, but she was also wary of empty promises and performative gestures. On the day of the press conference, Amelia arrived at the school with Simone and the other parents by her side. The room was filled with reporters, their cameras flashing as the board members took their seats at the front of the room. Mr. Kine. Jaspers stood at the podium, his expression serious as he addressed the crowd. After a thorough investigation, the board has concluded that Mr. Dominic's actions were not in line with the values of Westview Preparatory School. Effective immediately, Mr. Dominic will be placed on administrative leave, and we will be implementing new policies to ensure that every student feels safe and respected within our school. The room erupted in murmurs as reporters scrambled to jot down notes. Amelia felt a sense of relief, but she also knew this was only part of the battle. She stepped forward, catching the attention of the room as she addressed the board directly. We appreciate your decision, Mr. Jaspers, but we expect the school to follow through on these promises. This isn't just about removing one teacher. This is about creating an environment where every child can thrive without fear of prejudice. Mr. Jaspers nodded, his tone conciliatory. You have our assurance, Miss James. We are committed to making Westview a place where all students are valued. As the press conference concluded, Amelia felt a sense of closure mixed with determination. This was a victory, but it was also a reminder of the work that still needed to be done. She turned to Simone, a quiet smile of gratitude passing between them. Outside, Lily was waiting, her face lighting up as she saw her mother approach. She hugged Amelia tightly, her voice filled with gratitude and relief. Thank you, Mom, for everything. Amelia held her daughter close, her heart swelling with pride. Always, sweetheart, always. As they walked away from the school together, Amelia knew that this was only the beginning. She would continue to fight, to stand up for what was right, and to ensure that her daughter and every child had the opportunity to learn and grow in a world free from prejudice.